Dear hotel receptionists, who was the most horrible guest you have ever encountered? Far too many to list them all, unfortunately, but one of the worst was during my first week, not in training, love it, where I was thankfully in the back office right behind the desk doing some reservations work instead of being at the desk where I'd mostly been during training. A groom had emailed our team and asked us to please go into their room and get the bride's dress to steam it before their wedding the next day. We made sure we had permission to enter the room and whatnot, and our staff, though very uncomfortable, got the dress. She noticed right away that there were rips and dirty spots on the dress, which she took pictures of as soon as she opened the dress bag. Timestamps lined up right after she got the dress. There was no way she could have done it. The bride came down after screaming at our staff and accusing our staff of trying to steal her dress and then destroying it, making it, quote, unwearable. It was a few tiny rips and smudge spots that, again, we didn't do. Was running around the lobby screaming at the top of her lungs, threatening to get violent with staff, screaming that her rich daddy would have the hotel closed down and all of us fired. It was a luxury hotel in a major U.S. city. Her belief was that we stole her dress, wrecked it for fun, steamed it, and then put it back in the room. How does any of that make sense? No clue. Our manager calmly asked her to step around the desk and read the email from her fiancé telling us to do this and that the bride requested it. She accused us of lying despite the email proof from his direct email address, LMAO. When the groom came down, our manager pointed out that he'd asked us to do that and he played dumb. The day after the wedding, her father came down to check out and screamed at our staff for upsetting his daughter before her wedding and asked for discounts. We said no, lol. Genuine psycho behavior. Hope she gets therapy. Yeah, sounds like someone needed a good dose of reality before walking down that aisle. Story 2. I've got a couple. There's a lady who has been a regular guest at my hotel for decades and is crazy entitled. Recently, she decided she didn't like the room she was given, but rather than tell the front desk, she found a maintenance worker and got him to let her into a room that wasn't hers by claiming that she'd lost her key. Then she proceeded to move all of her stuff into the new room. Another guest was a homeless lady who had been staying at the hotel for a few months. Apparently, a friend of her father's was paying for it. One night, she was found in the dry storage room stealing food. When she was evicted, they found her room was full of giant piles of stuff she'd apparently been stealing throughout her entire stay. It was like a hoarder's house. The next day, she snuck back into the hotel and tried to steal more stuff, then set up a camp in the parking lot until the police were called. Finally, years ago, I was working at a hostel in Kyiv. We had this one guest who was absolutely disgusting. He would sit in the kitchen and shovel food into his mouth while staring off into space. Crumbs falling all over the floor, then eventually getting up and leaving without cleaning up after himself. He never talked and he smelled awful. One night when I was thankfully out with my ex, apparently he crapped himself in his sleep so badly it woke up everyone in the dorm. My coworker was unable to wake him up and he didn't seem to be breathing, so he called an ambulance. Paramedics came to revive him. Apparently, he'd taken a bunch of stuff while drinking. Everyone in that dorm had to sleep in the common room that night. All the bedding was thrown away and the smell still lingered for a couple of days. Story 3. I worked at a cheap motel about 15 years ago that had a big indoor atrium area with a pool and hot tub. We had locals that liked to come and enjoy the pool for a staycation. And there was this one lady who was a regular and would come a few times a year, and I would always recognize her but didn't have any meaningful interactions. Well, she was there with her kids and staying for multiple days, but paying by the day in cash. Checkout time was noon and my shift started at 3 p.m. I got there and the owner let me know she was in the pool with her kids but hadn't paid for the day yet, so he deactivated her keys and let her know it was time to pay up. Boss left for the day, so I was manning the front desk alone, and about an hour into my shift, the atrium to lobby door flew open and slammed into the wall. It made a massive noise and I was stunned. It didn't shatter the glass door. She immediately is screaming at me, and I was really trying to calm her down and explain that I was only doing what my boss had told me to do. I told her I know she's a regular and that I was sorry this was happening, but let's just sort it out and move on. She wasn't having any of it and just continued to scream at me in the lobby, saying she had never seen me before. I pretty much told her, look, lady, this is a situation we're in. You can settle down and pay me or you can leave. I had to reactivate her keys so she could go get money, and when she came back in, she threw the money at me, still being horrible to me. And I just told her I changed my mind and she could get out. I told her in 15 minutes I would be around to check on the room, and if she wasn't gone, I was calling the cops. She was vile to me the entire time when I was trying to be polite, connect with her, and bring everything down a notch. Throwing the money at me crossed the line and I was done. Never saw her again after that. That was the most horrible guest I remember dealing with, but that job got me lots of stories. Worked there for 4 years while I was in school, and it was wild sometimes. Like the homeless guy who tried to sleep in the sauna, the cops chasing a dude who bailed out during a high speed chase, a young guy who was with a tree cutting crew who passed away in the room, the guy who tipped me more than my entire paycheck, the maintenance man who ended the head housekeeper in a room while she was cleaning it. The list goes on. Lol. Story 4. We had a guru and her two associates come in once. The associates weren't allowed to speak. The guru called down to the front desk because the polyester mattress cover was interfering with her aura. She said she had to have a natural cotton fiber cover. So we found a different brand, cut out the tag that said polyester, told her it was cotton, and put it on her bed. Next day, she reported her aura was fine after sleeping on the cotton cover. Meanwhile, while we were changing her bed, her associates ate the entire week's worth of bananas in the dining room plus a crap ton of sausage. Neither one of them weighed over 100 pounds. And during all of that, one of our housekeepers went into a room and found a knit comb and empty bottles of lice shampoo. Turns out a family had rented 3 or 4 different rooms all over the hotel. One of the kids had lice and was running in and out of all of their rooms. I thought our manager was going to quit that day. Story 5. I once stayed at a hotel next to an event center I was volunteering at. I had a hotel room in a hotel maybe 300 meters from the event center. Well, what no one realized was that the bridge over the railway between the event center and the hotel was shut for repairs, and the detour was 8 miles. I hadn't slept for 48 hours mid-event and decided I absolutely had to sleep right then, so decided to climb across this building side of a railway bridge at about 2 a.m. I stumbled and fell on a pile of wet cement gravel, and I ate that crap face first at full speed. I got up and blearily stumbled back to the hotel and crawled into bed. In the morning, I woke up, and as I got down to the ground floor of the hotel, there was gravel everywhere. There was a trail of it right through the hotel lobby back to the entrance, and staff frantically trying to sweep it up. Apparently, some intoxicated guest had trapezed it in. Hey, I was sober as a judge, just very tired and hurt, and the night staff had just left it there for the day team to deal with. So, yeah, I was accidentally deemed to be intoxicated and caused a gravelly mess in a hotel lobby despite having had 0 drinks. I guess sleepwalking can take on many forms, and that's a good enough excuse, better than being intoxicated. Story 6. Our neighbors had a house fire and got put up at a local hotel by their insurance. The hotel eventually kicked them out. They had 9 kids who would spend the day running up and down the halls, nonstop noise complaints. I suspect there was also some kind of hotel blacklist involved because the next thing we knew, 2 giant trailers were deposited in the yard. One was on either side of the burned down house, each about 20 feet from our house and the neighboring house on the other side. The town looked the other way on all the zoning laws because penalizing fire victims was not a good look. The investigation eventually found that they had stacked newspapers up to the ceiling in giant piles in the basement to make money off of recycling. It had caught fire when they ran a kerosene heater next to it. They were lucky they didn't pass away. Eventually, they stopped emptying these sewage tanks from the trailers and started putting soiled toilet paper directly in the construction dumpster facing the street. The wind would catch it and blow it into the neighboring yards. Finally had to get the health department involved. I came home from school and my dad had left a clear plastic bag of the stuff tied with a ribbon for the health inspector. Blech. Story 7. We had a guest whose kid squat walked a mess 12 feet in a line into the pool, then demanded we clean up their child's mess. Then they were upset that we had to close the pool. Also had a creepy old man come up to me asking me to bring rubber duckies to his room for his bath every night in a 5-star hotel, and I'd always just kind of nervously laugh. I'm living in far north Queensland in Australia where there are lots of creatures. They do get in sometimes, no matter how nice the hotel is. It is the rainforest. We had a guest from NZ come screaming at us about a lizard infestation because she found a 1-inch gecko in her room. She said her kids were afraid. They weren't. And it was unsanitary and unsafe. We removed the lizard, and she demanded an entire new room. Then she left a very nasty review because one of us cracked a smile at the term lizard infestation. I have so many weird stories, I can't even remember half of them. Story 8. I've told this story in the hotel front desk sub, but here goes. Elderly woman who stayed with her son who had mental disabilities. She'd sold her house and hadn't bothered to even start looking for a new place, so was spending her money on a hotel rather than a home. After a while, I switched to another hotel and didn't give her a second thought until she started staying at that new hotel. She built up a ton of reward points and would pay for her room with those points whenever possible. One day, her point reservation was up, and when she came in, I waved her over and quietly asked if she wanted to use points again for that night or pay with a card. She said she'd pay, and I thought that'd be it. Nope. The next day, I was told I had a guest complain about me, which I assumed was a joke. Nope. She made a complaint about me, saying that I had screamed at her in front of a lobby full of people that she owed me money. I refused to have anything to do with her after that. Story 9. I used to work as a night receptionist at a hotel in Jalandhar, India a few years ago. Most nights were uneventful, but one guest will forever be burned into my memory. So it was around 2 a.m. when a man came stumbling to the front desk, looking panicked. He whispered, "There's someone in my room." Naturally, I was alarmed. I immediately checked the system to ensure he hadn't been double booked, but everything looked fine. I offered to check the room with him. As we entered, I turned on the lights, and there it was, the quote, intruder. It was a life-size cutout of a Bollywood actor that we had placed in the hallway for a promotion earlier that day. For some reason, he had brought it into his room, propped it in a corner, and forgotten about it. I tried to keep a straight face as he muttered something about being too tired and shuffled back to bed. The next morning, he checked out like nothing had happened, but I'll never forget having to rescue someone from their own cardboard celebrity at 2 a.m. Story 10. One night, a sketchy dude came in with a really long coat. He looked like trouble and like he hadn't slept for weeks. He paid in cash, which even 20 years ago was usually a bad sign. I gave him his key and he went to his room. About 5 minutes later, he came back in a huff, yelling. He had a long object inside his coat with his hand on it. He didn't threaten me, but I was on edge. He threw the key over the desk and told me that it didn't work. I looked and let him know that wasn't the key that I gave him, so of course it didn't work. He found the right key and stormed off. About 2 hours later, the police arrive and one is holding one of those parabolic listening devices. They asked if I'd checked the dude in and what room he was in. He was wanted for armed robbery with a weapon. I gave them the info and they went and staked out the room and arrested him when he came out. It is pretty scary thinking back on it, and I'm sure the long object under his coat was the weapon. Yeah, I think I'd start carrying a key verification spray just in case. Story 11. A man was checking into a room that was under his wife's name. She did not add his name to the room, so I could not let him in. I had to call the wife to get permission. We do this for guest safety. I couldn't get a hold of her, and he was livid. He didn't want to show me his ID. "Don't you know who I am? I've been staying here for 14 years. The hotel was 4 years old. I was very new at the job as well, like 3 months. Second, once I did have his ID, he was threatening me in my job, saying I would regret the day I did this to him. His wife was gonna end me. Eventually got a hold of his wife. She gave approval. She was so sweet. I smiled and gave him the room key. He told me to go screw myself. This whole thing was like 30 minutes. Story 12. I had a guest who came and complained that his window wasn't closing properly. I offered him a different room. He refused and demanded I come up to fix it. It kicked up a huge fuss until I finally called my duty manager, another woman. He wouldn't settle down until we went up to the room to take a look. He insisted on walking behind us. When we got to the room, we insisted he go in first. He had thrown the table in his room down so it blocked the walkway past the door, and we both refused to enter the room as he clearly wanted us to do while he showed us how the window would enclose. My duty manager stepped in and shut the window properly. We retreated to the office and he came down again shortly after, claiming there was another issue and he needed us to come up again. When we refused, he said we were prejudiced for not helping him. After my duty manager shut him down, we didn't see him again for the duration of his stay. He definitely wanted to get us alone in that room. Still creeped out just thinking about it. I'm not sure if he was just a criminal or if he was on substance, but his behavior was definitely erratic. Story 13. I used to work the night audit shift as I was a night manager, and we had this one guy who became a serious issue. He would periodically come in, but if it was early, like 2 a.m., stroll in. If he saw that there were 2 females, he'd claim the shower wasn't working properly. When you went up, he would start to take off when you had your back to him. Our management was absolutely crap and wouldn't care, so we made it an unofficial rule that if we worked alone or it was myself and the other female, we would just tell him that our staff policy changed, and it was now that 2 people had to come up to the room. After that, he just stopped coming less and less. I'm not sure what happened to him, as I was one of the 10 people that management fired because we knew what was going on at the hotel. The main manager was sleeping with the maintenance man while she was still married, and he was sleeping with her daughter, who may or may not have worked there. That was a blessing in disguise, though I met some cool people that I still talk to today, and that was over 10 years ago. Story 14. I worked at one of those all-inclusive giga hotels in Spain. For a fixed price, you have a fixed week of holidays together with thousands of other guests. Check-ins were like guiding a herd of sheep. This story is about an older lady. I assume between 60, 70 years of age from the UK. Before she entered the hotel, we were already informed that this guest might be troublesome. Apparently, she visited regularly, like 3 times a year, and always came by herself. The majority of her holiday week, she would hang around the check-in counter, complaining about all sorts of things. My idea was that her complaints were the only way she learned how to communicate with others and effectively to get rid of her loneliness. As the week progressed, me and my colleagues instinctively started to ignore her as most of her complaints had nothing to do with the hospitality of the hotel. And ignoring her angered her, so here we go. One evening, unlike her fourth day, she came running and screaming into the lobby accusing the hotel of robbing her. She said she was already very suspicious of all the staff members, so when she took a shower that evening, she put a shoe on during her dining time. When she finished her shower, according to her, that shoe was on her floor instead of on the table, so someone must have entered her room to rob her. Then she called the police and things kind of escalated. Since the story was so full of holes, the Spanish police didn't do much, and at the end of her stay, she greeted us and said, "See you in 3 months." Story 15. An entitled Karen burned a bag of microwavable popcorn, threw it out in the hallway, and called down to me at the front desk and demanded I come get it at that exact moment. I was the only one working at the time in a college town during football season. I had several groups in the lobby waiting for me to get to them, and I was so busy. I told her I couldn't come up there right then, and I'd be there when I could. She flipped out and started yelling at me, so I told her I was very sorry and I hung up. She then proceeded to scatter the burned popcorn and the bag in the elevator, which I found out from another guest that witnessed her throwing a loud tantrum. She then came down to the front desk laughing, pointing, and taking pictures of me, saying she was reporting me to the corporate. I'll never forget that horrible woman, and thankfully I never heard a thing from my boss about it. I left that job a few months later. I had many other situations happen, and I'm actually not sure she was the worst one now that I think about it. Hotel work just isn't for me. Story 16. I had a guest one time that was problematic from check-in. First, he had a huge problem. I had no clue who he was, saying he was here all the time, even though I worked most days of the week and had never seen him before. Once I finally got his name and started checking him in, he asked how much the room cost. I told him the price, and immediately he started complaining that it was too expensive, even though he had booked the room online himself and paid. Not much I can do but keep checking him in and offer a free drink from the bar, which he very quickly took. Later in the evening, he came in with what we assumed to be a call girl and drank heavily at the bar, then stumbled back to his room to do the deed with his lady friend. At some point in the night, I received a phone call that I needed to come back to the hotel because apparently he had fallen asleep in the shower and laid over the shower drain, flooding not only his room but the next 2 floors under him. He then blamed us for having crappy shower drains and refused to pay the damages. Now I remember his name. And if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 17. Toss up on this one. I worked an audit shift at a small chain in the Midwestern US. Late nights bring all sorts. First guy, he was a trip. Second guy was less entertaining. First guy walked down from his room in a tank top, towel, and combat boots. "What kind of weapon is this?" Guy proceeds to lay it on the counter. I immediately unloaded it, mag and an extra now on the counter out of his reach. I told him what I thought. He didn't believe me and said it was a 9mm, which it wasn't, but hey, not my problem, per se. Gave him his weapon back and ammo, which he wasn't too upset about, as I said he'd get them back on checkout. Dude leaves, goes to Walmart, and pulls the same shtick. They called the cops. Everybody talked, and he was let go on the grounds of just being stupid. They then sell him ammo. So back he comes, all laughing it off, said I was right, it was a .22, and told me the Wally World tale. He then asks if there's a place to fire on property. Nope, sure ain't. "That's awful, but I get it," he said. The guy then proceeds to walk outside, step purposefully off of our property and parking lot, and shoots the Applebee's sign across the street. When he came back in, I asked to see the weapon as I haven't seen one like it in ages. He hands it right over, so I unloaded it yet again and put it all in secure storage for checkout to deal with. He was shockingly okay with all of this. The other guy? Yeah, the most intoxicated one at the wedding party, crying and shouting in the halls. So I go to talk to him and get him to go back to his room. He ends up trying to harm me against the hallway wall. He caught a knee to the stones and an accidental headbutt. Getting away, I called the cops. They were maybe stationed 5 miles away. His friends tried to get me not to call the cops because he wouldn't like that. Too late for that, right? So the guy comes back to the desk, threatening me just as the cops arrived. He resisted arrest in spectacular fashion. This man took not one, not two, but 3 tasers to keep him down. Taser confetti and whiz everywhere. What a job. Story 18. I have too many, but we'll start with one. I was working in a party hostel in Prague, and it was just after so there were barely any guests. Anyways, the owners opted to allow a family of Syrian refugees, a father and 2 teenage sons, to stay for free through an NGO. Anyways, they are in a dorm room and opposite them is the bathroom. My duty at night is to check the bathrooms, and I find the toilet opposite them completely covered in crap. I concluded that someone must have stood on the seat and then squatted. Since this family were the only ones next to it, I figured it had to be them. Worse, they were staying for 3 more nights. So I tried to explain the next day, but they spoke little English, resulting in me using my skills and mine to try to get my message across. I guess it worked as there were no more crap seats after. The family was not horrible, but it was a horrible experience. Story 19. The couple in the 9th floor room in full view of the 10th floor restaurant in the neighboring tower, late evening, dark with all their lights on, having romping intimacy with their curtains wide open. Restaurant manager called me at the front desk to figure out which room it was and to alert them that they had an audience. Oh, they knew and just thanked me for calling and carried on. Hotel manager had to go up and have a chat with them and point out there were children in the restaurant too. Then there was a fellow who jumped from one of the towers one night, and we didn't know until someone came in to say there was something outside. Just horrible. Lots of call girls with damp cash who wanted change, but no way was I touching those bills. Then they'd act like I was the problem. Intoxicated guests making everyone miserable, other guests soliciting the bellman or room service guys for intimacy, much more common than with female staff. Worse was the old ex-military hotel security duo who used any excuse to roughen up homeless guys just trying to stay warm in the stairwells. Not really answering your question, as overall there were and are lots of entitled trash and poor souls who come through those doors. Story 20. I worked in Las Vegas in college and worked at a major resort on the Strip. We had one guest in particular, a popular singer. I will not mention her name, but I will say that she is fully thawed this time of year. She was not only the worst guest I ever worked with, but also one of the worst human beings I worked with. When her car was in the porte cochere, no cars under $100,000 were allowed to be in the area, even if her car was just parked. Cabs were supposed to drop off guests on the upper porte cochere, so hundreds of cab drivers had to be diverted to the lower, creating huge backups. They would get in one lane, anticipating being sent up top, and now had to be moved across 3 lanes of queued traffic to go to the lower. The lobby and casino floor needed to be cleared whenever she was passing through, so nobody could bother her. She refused to use the back entrance that every other major celebrity used. She demanded housekeeping 3 times per day and demanded her staff's rooms to be treated the same. She did not want to see any of the staff at any time unless they were directly interacting with her or her staff. She was just a plain, vile person to anyone she viewed as beneath her. My wife and I had a table at a nightclub that night, and she was there because her SO was DJing that night. She had an entire section of the club blocked off, and security kept one of the bathrooms clear for her people to use. To counter this, Jay-Z and Beyoncé were the absolute best celebrity guests I have ever worked with. Story 21. I managed a hotel near the beach in Rhode Island, managed for a room and got paid by the hour to clean. We had a room with a broken shower. 4th of July weekend, rooms are $300 a night. This was the 90s. $150 for no shower. Most of these rooms are booked a year in advance. People would literally book the same room for next year. I've been telling people since 6 p.m. that no shower room is the only thing available for 60 miles. Because I was nice enough to call around for people, finally around 10, someone just took it. Some family from earlier comes back at like midnight screaming at me, insisting I said I'd hold that room for them. No, bro, I don't hold rooms on the 4th of July weekend. He demanded I let him and his 4 kids sleep in the closed-in gazebo thing. Like, no, it's locked up. The credit card machine and guest records are in there. Get out. He literally grabbed and shook me. I was a 20-something-year-old chick. Good thing the fisherman who kept his room year-round heard. He saved me and we still had to call the cops. I'd rather deal with ornery, antisocial, slightly off-smelling fishermen that rented rooms off-season and slept on their boats than tourists. Story 22. UK hotel. Worked there for a few years as night security. Great job, crap pay. Never really had anything major happen. A few stupid fights and stuff between intoxicated guests was the worst of it. About a month before I left, I was called to the 4th floor because a guest had heard a woman screaming. She had come to the hotel with a man who was a criminal, so I had to basically go in there and fight the criminal, and it was crap. I mean, I suppose I didn't have to, but I felt compelled. I'm very tall and have a somewhat intimidating/angular face, but I'm not that well built. It was quite a short but stocky/gym dude, so it was hard going for me. Luckily, the police had been called and they arrived after a few minutes, so it didn't go on for too long. Always wondered if I did the right thing. Maybe I made it more traumatic for the woman and myself, if I'm honest. But it is what it is now, hindsight and all that. I left the job shortly after that. Woman was okay, physically at least. I had to go to court, etc. as a witness, all that jazz. Guy did get convicted. No idea how she's doing now. Hopefully, well enough. So yeah, a criminal was my worst guest. Story 23. I wasn't front desk, but their best stories were heard round the hotel. So this couple and their dog checked into the hotel. I'm going to give them the names of Sam and Pat. They get into a fight, and Sam storms out, leaving Pat and the dog. Pat stays the night, but to punish Sam, leaves the dog in one of the staff service areas where it is found. No one knows who the dog belongs to, and at the end of the day, a member of the HR team brings the dog home, as it can't be left wandering the hotel, obviously. The next day, Pat wants to reconcile with Sam, but Sam is still upset about the dog being left behind and won't talk until Pat retrieves it. So Pat comes to the hotel where staff explain that a team member took the dog home for safety and will go get it. Pat has a total breakdown and decides they will cause a scene until the dog is returned. The police are obviously called. The police show up and chase Pat, who is apparently so slippery that staff are wondering if they'd covered themselves in grease beforehand. They had not, for the record. The cops eventually catch Pat and take them away. I don't know what happened after that, but the dog was returned to Sam and Pat eventually. Story 24. Not a receptionist, but I did hotel security for a few places in the back half of the 2000s. Got called a prejudice by a 150-person wedding party for asking that the literally building-shaking music be turned down. This was around 1:30 in the morning, and they were far from the only people in the hotel. The guy I had relieved when I clocked in warned me that they'd been an issue all weekend. After this and their refusal to tell the DJ to turn it down, hotel management gave me the go-ahead to kick them out. The cops had to get involved after they threatened me, one guest even making a grab at my weapon, and hotel management. Different hotel, this place was across the street from UAB Hospital in Birmingham, and a big chunk of the guests there were folks who were in town for their spouse, kid, etc., to undergo cancer treatments and other procedures that they couldn't get done at their local hospital. So the management was very strict about noise complaints because, hey, a lot of the folks here are already exhausted and miserable. Got threatened on a few occasions there. Same hotel, noise complaint. I went up to the room, knocked on the door, and I heard from the other side, "Is that the call girl?" It was a bridal party, bridal shower, whatever the bridal version of a bachelor's party is, and the bride opened the door. I told her, "I'm flattered, but no, I do need to ask you ladies to keep it down." Thankfully, they were super cool about it. Story 25. Ooh, I got one. I was the night auditor. It was pretty chill. I smoked a ton of and watched movies. Loved it. So one night, this guy, mid-30s, comes in and we get to talking. I don't know why everyone is so open with me, but he tells me he's expecting his sugar mom, who pretty much finances his life while he sleeps with her in return. Good for him, honestly. Sweet deal. She comes in. We chat a few times throughout the night. Pretty nice, but kind of annoying. I'm guessing in her 50s. At one point, dude comes out and asks if I wanted a shot. I'm like, sure, I'll take the opportunity for free drinks. Ugh, how stupid. I walk into the room, and immediately it smells like cigarette smoke. The room was a mess, and all I can think about is how awkward it was going to be to charge them for it in the morning. She'll just be a moment in the bathroom, she says, so I sit down and try to avoid eye contact with the sugar baby. Out of nowhere, the bathroom, sugar mother walks out completely bare. Only thing out of my mouth is Minchia before I froze. I've had my fair share of couples inquire. I don't want to assume it's the pineapple tattoo I decided to get on my arm for me, but I don't know what else it could be. That seems rude. Sorry, swingers, for stereotyping you. Anyways, I'm just a poor little 19-year-old dumb kid that smoked 30 minutes before this event took place. It took me a few minutes to process, but I weaseled my way out. I had to charge her $350 for the cigarettes and then an additional fee for the drinks all over the place. She was fine with it. And then she gave me an extra $100. It felt kind of yucky, but a buck's a buck. I also had a grocery shop for the bipolar old lady that stayed long term because the manager felt bad for her. She touched everyone's back. That was pretty bad too, lol. This post reminded me about her. I will have to try to block her from my memory all over again. Story 26. I've been that guest, and I only found out 2 weeks later. At a wedding in another country, I sleptwalked out of my room at 2 a.m. in just my garments. I ended up going up and down in an elevator with no idea what was happening. A night porter came to help me, but evidently I thought he was attacking me, and I hit him with an elbow and scampered off. There was no real damage done, thank goodness. Somehow I made it back into my room. My wife slept through the whole thing. We departed early that morning to go visit family, completely separate from the wedding. I have no recollection of this, and neither my wife and I had any clue what happened until 2 weeks later. At the airport back to my home country, we ran into the bride and groom. They mentioned, "Did you hear about the commotion at the hotel with the night porter?" And we replied that we had not. They told the story from the hotel's perspective. I said, "That's funny. I have sleptwalked before. I really hope that wasn't me." And my wife said, "Now that you do mention it, at one point in the night, I think I remember you were up and said you had trouble finding your way back from the toilet. But I didn't think anything of it because you just got back in bed and I thought it was all sorted out." Then I said, "Now that you mention it, the hotel door was slightly ajar in the morning, and I thought we must have just neglected to shut it last night." It dawned on us that I was definitely the mystery sleepwalker. We relayed our apologies to the hotel, but only after we were back in our home country and free of any potential international incident. They were remarkably understanding and said they'd still been scratching their heads trying to figure out how it all happened and why no one could figure out who it was. All well in the end, and I'm just glad it didn't happen in America where I'd surely have been terminated. Story 27. This is my worst guess by far, pretty tame compared to other comments, but it comes with a bonus petty response from yours truly. One night I had a guest who asked me to make sure some flies were cleaned off the windowsill in his room. He stressed to me it's very important and would I please be sure to get it taken care of. I said, of course, I'll make sure to let housekeeping know and it will be done ASAP. I would have done it myself, but that wasn't policy. There was a running housekeeping log specifically for this exact reason. I wrote the room number and details about the flies on the windowsill as well as talked to the head of housekeeping directly. It was the only housekeeping note for that day. I thought nothing of it, but when I was working my swing shift the next day, he came back down to the desk. Apparently, the housekeepers either forgot or were too lazy to do it. It wasn't the first time this had happened. The housekeepers were pretty damn lazy and always had complaints about dirty tubs, hair in the drains, and generally just bad cleanup jobs, etc. They always apologized and did nothing about it, so needless to say, I was slightly annoyed. Anyways, when I say the guest was irate, he was beyond that. That guy was beside himself, causing a scene, saying this hotel is a piece of crap. It wasn't. I'm worthless, yada yada yada. Keep in mind that I always got great guest reviews. I felt bad for the guy, to be honest. I suppose he could be a hypochondriac or something. In his defense, I didn't think he was wrong, and I actually agreed with him. He did express to me how important it was, and I didn't get it done, and it's not hard to take 5 minutes to clean a few flies off a windowsill. I was 19 at the time and naive about how things work in a corporate setting. Up until then, I worked for my dad as a carpenter during the summer, so all I knew was construction etiquette, or lack thereof, and banter up to that point. I was working this job part-time while I was in college, so I didn't really care for the job and just needed extra money. However, after I got screamed at for like 10 minutes and had to use my customer service mask to cater to this guest, my attitude changed to very annoyed. It's not my job to clean rooms per hotel policy, and I felt they put me in this situation because of their incompetence. Then the light bulb moment happened. I thought, screw it. They don't give a crap about what is written in this logbook, so they probably won't see it anyways. So, in my fog of naivety, I wrote in the housekeeping log, a guest came down very upset because housekeeping decided it wasn't important to read this logbook. Why do I write stuff in this logbook if nobody does it anyways, in all caps? And on the next line, you forgot the flies on the windowsill, or maybe it slipped your mind again, please do that. You know, super passive-aggressive crap, lol. They were the only notes written on the page in large lettering so you couldn't miss it. It was too funny because when I left around midnight and when I got there the next day, nobody said anything to me about it. However, later that night, the head of housekeeping came down and told me, never write something like that down in this log again. This is for serious requests only. I can't believe you would do something like that. She was a very unlikable person and we had butted heads about this in the past, so I responded, well, if you just did your job, then I wouldn't have to. She stormed out of the room like a toddler having a tantrum. I couldn't care less and honestly wanted everyone to see how incompetent she was and show she didn't care about putting her coworkers in a bad situation because of it. The next day, I was voted off the island, LMAO. The silver lining was that she never changed her ways, so she was reprimanded, fired, and there were sweeping changes to the way logbooks were looked at. I like to think I took one for the team. Lol, good times. Story 28. My wife works night audit, so she has a lot of wild stories, but many of them are similar to other stories in this thread. So I'll share one of the odder ones that resulted in the police coming out. There was one night when she had a late check-in to show up with his suitcase and check in like everything was normal. He was from out of the country, but we live somewhere that gets a lot of tourism and the hotel is in a part of town a lot of people wanted to go to, so none of this is even a little bit out of the ordinary. What's less ordinary is that he went up to his room and then 10 or 15 minutes later came back down without his suitcase, having changed his clothes and with a hat on. He dropped his card in the checkout drop box but seemed to be trying to hide the fact that he was doing so. This was obviously pretty suspicious. She tried calling the phone number they had on file for the guest and it went straight to voicemail. She called security, who called the police. The man came back shortly before the police got there, came up to the front desk and said he lost his key and asked for a new one, like he didn't know he had been seen dropping it in the checkout box. Everything ended up being fine, but to this day, she doesn't know why he put the key in the drop box and then claimed to have lost it. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.